So you've been told Aperture controls background blur, which of course it does. But what if I told you that's only half the story? Because when you really understand Aperture, you're not just blurring backgrounds, you're deciding what matters most in your picture. And here's the bit most people miss. Aperture isn't simply just a technical setting, it's actually a creative decision. It's you saying, look here, not over there. And when you start using it like that, your photos immediately feel more intentional and much more purposeful. So in this video, I'm going to give you 5 simple exercises you can go out and try today. And by the end, you won't just understand Aperture, you'll know how to use it. And if you can stick around until the end, I've got a bonus tip for you that really helps bring all of this together. But before we dive in, if you'd like a bit more structure, support, and somewhere to actually develop your photography, this is well worth a look. If you'd like a safe space to continue your photography journey with like-minded people, then why not come and join us in our Photography Foundations community over on School. It's a really safe and friendly place to be. No ads, no algorithms, and no traditional social media nonsense. Just photographers from all around the world who are learning, practicing, sharing, and supporting each other. We have an active forum where members post their images, ask questions, and share ideas. There's a classroom with structured learning and feedback sessions, a members map so you can see who's near you, and regular challenges and discussions to keep your photography moving forward. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, the link is in the description, or you can use the QR code on the screen, and we'd love to see you there. Okay, before the practical exercises, let's have a quick look at what Aperture actually is and to make sure all of this makes sense. Aperture is basically the opening inside your lens. A wide aperture, like f1.8, lets in more light and gives you a shallow depth of field, so only a small part of your image is sharp. A narrow aperture, like f11 or f16, lets in less light, but more of your scene is in focus. And before we move on, this is the bit that confuses a lot of people. Why does a wide aperture have a low number and a narrow aperture a high number? And here's a very simple way to think about that. The f number isn't the size of the hole, it's a ratio based on the focal length of the lens compared to the opening. So as the number gets bigger, the actual opening gets smaller, and as the number gets smaller, the opening gets bigger. But you don't need to get bogged down in the maths behind it. You just need to remember this. A low number is a big opening and lets in more light and less focus. A high number is a small opening, less light and more focus. If you can wrap your head around that, you're good to go. Now, here's where this fits into the exposure triangle. You've got 3 things controlled in a manual exposure: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. And they're all interconnected. If you change one, you have to adjust one of the others to keep your exposure balanced. An aperture is doing 2 jobs at the same time. First of all, it's controlling the amount of light that hits the sensor. And secondly, it's controlling the depth of field, or DOF for short. That's why it's so important, and why knowing this technical stuff actually helps when you're taking pictures to express yourself. Right, let's make this a bit more practical and have a look at these exercises. So how do we do this? Well, first, ideally set up on a tripod if you have one, although you can also handheld if you're really steady. Then find yourself a simple subject, a mug, a plant, or even a person, anything you like really. Put your camera in aperture priority mode, A or AV, and let the camera decide the rest for you. It'll set the shutter speed and the ISO. Set your aperture to the lowest number you have available, like f1.8 or f3.5. Focus on your subject and take a shot. Now, without moving, change to f8 or f11 and take the exact same shot again. You'll see that the background goes from soft and blurry to much sharper and much more detailed. This works because when you use a wide aperture, you're using a larger opening, and this creates a shallow focus area, so therefore only a small slice of your image is actually sharp. And as you close the aperture down, that focus area gets deeper, and then more of the scene actually falls into focus. So you're not just taking a photo of a subject, you're deciding how much of the world around it matters, and that decision is totally down to you. You're simply using the camera as a tool to get it done. So can you see why knowing some of this techie stuff is really important? So here's how we do this one, the step back test. Set your aperture to f2.8. Get close to your subject. Focus on it and take a shot. Now step back a few meters, refocus on your subject and take the same shot again, still at f2.8. And this might blow your mind the first time you see it, because the background becomes less blurred even though your aperture hasn't changed. This happens because depth of field isn't just about aperture, it's also about distance. The closer you are to your subject, the more shallow your depth of field appears. As you move back, more of the scene falls into focus. That's pretty cool, eh? So the takeaway here is that aperture doesn't work on its own. It's part of a combination, and distance is a big part of that. So why not have a play and see what you can come up with? So for this one, the background control, find the subject with a busy or distracting background. Try and position your subject a few meters away from the background so there's a clear separation between the two. Then start with an aperture of f2.8, focus on your subject and then take a shot. Then switch to f11, focus on your subject again and take the same shot. And what you see is that at f2.8, the background softens and distractions fade away. At f11, everything comes back into view and therefore becomes more distracting. This is important to know because your viewer's eye is naturally drawn to what's sharp. So when everything is sharp, they don't always know where to look. But when you limit what's in focus, you guide their attention. Does that make sense? So from this, we can see that aperture is one of the most powerful ways to simplify your photos. Be aware though, a shallow depth of field is not a magic eraser. A bright, busy background can still be distracting, even if it is out of focus. Okay, for this one, switch your camera to manual mode. And if you've never shot in manual mode before, don't worry, it's not as difficult as some would make out. Here's a quick crash course for you. In manual mode, you control all three, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. You'll see a light meter in your viewfinder or on the LCD screen. Aim to keep that meter around the middle or 0 for a balanced exposure. And the settings will also change from scene to scene, and that's depending on how much light you have available in any given location. Okay, if you got that, let's do the exercise. First, set your aperture to f2.8. Then adjust your shutter speed and or the ISO until the meter is around 0, and then take a photo. Now change to f11, and you'll see the meter drop, which means that it's now underexposed. So to get back to an acceptable exposure, adjust either your shutter speed, as in make it slower, or increase the ISO until the meter comes back to the middle, and then your exposure looks right again. By the way, if you're handheld and the shutter speed is less than 1/60th of a second, you may get blur from camera shake showing up in the image. So in that instance, definitely raise the ISO to keep the shutter speed to at least 1/60th of a second. Anyway, what you see from this exercise is that changing aperture directly affects brightness. So this proves that a wider aperture, a smaller f number, lets in more light. A narrower one, a larger f number, lets in less light. So every time you change aperture, you're changing the exposure. And that's why the other two settings exist, to balance it all out. So the takeaway here is that aperture is not an isolated setting. Every decision you make has a consequence, and that's the exposure triangle in action. Told you it wasn't rocket science. Okay, so you can go back to aperture priority mode now if you prefer, but why not stick to manual mode for a bit more practice? Anyway, take two photos of the same subject. For the first shot, try to keep a subject a few meters away from the background. Focus purely on the subject and shoot at f2 or f2.8. For the second shot, either step back or reframe slightly so more of the environment is included. Keep focus on the subject, but shoot at f11 so more of the scene is sharp. And what you should see is this. One image feels intimate and focused. The other feels broader and more descriptive. This is important, and it matters because this is where Aperture becomes a storytelling tool. You're deciding whether the background supports the story or whether it distracts from it. And that's the point. It's your decision. No right or wrong. Just your preference and how you want to tell the story. And I'm hoping this is making sense. So the big thing here is that you're not just changing a setting. You're actually changing the message. You're changing the narrative. So what have we done here? What have we actually achieved with these exercises? Well, you've seen how Aperture controls depth of field. You've seen how distance affects it. You've used it to simplify backgrounds. You've linked it to exposure. And you've used it to change the story. Overall, that's a massive step forward, I'm sure you'd agree. And as promised, because you're still with me, here's that bonus tip for you. How about this as a really simple way to approach it going forward? The next time you pick up your camera, don't think about starting with settings. Instead, start with a question. What do I want the viewer to focus on? If it's just a subject, go wide with your aperture for the shallow depth of field. If the environment matters, stop it down and get more of the background in focus. Then, and only then, adjust your shutter speed and your ISO to balance the exposure. So basically, you're starting with what's important. Then you're using the camera as a tool to produce what you want. And this changes things because you're no longer guessing. You're making a creative decision first. Then you're using the camera to support it. And that's a shift from taking photos to making photos. Pretty good, eh? And if you want a simple way to build all of this into your photography, I've put together an ebook called The 3 Essential Pillars of Good Photography. It helps you understand how these elements work together in a really clear, practical way. Links in the description and totally free when you sign up for the newsletter. Aperture is one of those things that can feel technical at first, but the more you experiment with it, the more you realize it's not about numbers, it's about choices. Choosing what to show and what to hide, and how you want your image to feel. And the only way this really sinks in is by doing exactly what we've done here. Get out, try these exercises, and see the difference for yourself. Because once this starts to fall into place, you stop relying on guesswork, and you start shooting with intent. Let me know in the comments which one you find most useful. I read and respond to everyone. And if you do want a bit more guidance, or a place to keep learning and sharing your work, don't forget to check out our Photography Foundations community over on School. It's a really supportive space, and you'd be more than welcome there. So if you got something from this, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, it really is appreciated. As always, thanks so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.